Jane was a beautiful young woman who had faced many struggles in life. She lost her parents at a very young age, leaving her alone in the world. Because there was no one to support her, she had to drop out of school. Every day she watched as her friends and age mates went to school, while she stayed at home, feeling like her life was wasting away. This made her sad, and she often cried at night, praying to God for a divine helper, someone who would show her the way and change her life for the better. But Jane had one special talent. She was an excellent baker. She could bake the most delicious cakes, with the softest texture and the sweetest taste. However, no one knew about her talent, so she rarely got any orders. People did not call her to bake cakes for them, and this made her feel useless. She wished she could showcase her skills, but she had no customers, no money, and no way to make a name for herself. One day, Jane sat under a big tree, lost in deep thought. She felt hopeless and wondered if her life would ever change. As she sat there staring at the ground, an old woman slowly walked toward her. The woman was dressed in a long, faded gown, and her eyes sparkled with wisdom. She gently sat beside Jane and smiled warmly. "My child, why are you looking so sad?" the old woman asked. Jane sighed and replied, "I feel like my life is going nowhere. I have no parents, no education, and no one calls me to bake cakes. I have a talent, but no one knows about it. I just want a better life." The old woman nodded knowingly and then placed her wrinkled hand on Jane's shoulder. "Do not worry, my dear," she said. "I have come to help you." Jane's eyes widened in surprise. "Help me? How?" she asked eagerly. The old woman smiled again. "From tomorrow, people will start calling you to bake cakes. You will become famous, and your work will be unlike anything anyone has ever seen. Every cake you bake will come to life." Jane gasped in shock. "Come to life? What do you mean?" The woman chuckled. "It means that if you bake a cake in the shape of a bird, it will come alive and fly. If you bake a cake shaped like a flower, it will bloom like a real flower. Your cakes will be special, magical, and unmatched. You will become so rich that no one can compete with you in wealth." Jane could hardly believe what she was hearing. She was so happy that she jumped up with excitement. "Thank you. Thank you so much. When will this start?" she asked eagerly. "By tomorrow," the woman said. "You will start receiving calls from people asking you to bake for them. But listen carefully. There is one rule you must never break." Jane stopped smiling and listened closely. "What is the rule?" she asked. The old woman's face became serious. "You must never bake a wild animal as a cake," she warned. "If you do, it will come alive, and you know what will happen. Wild animals can be dangerous. Bake anything you want, but stay away from making cakes in the shape of wild creatures. It will only bring harm and disaster." Jane nodded quickly. "I understand. I will never bake a wild animal." The old woman smiled, patted Jane's hand, and then slowly walked away. Jane rushed home, her heart filled with excitement and hope. She could not wait for tomorrow to see if what the woman had said was true. Would people really start calling her? Would her cakes really come to life? She lay in bed that night, dreaming of the wonderful life ahead. Little did she know, her life was about to change forever. Jane and the Magical Cakes, Part 2. The next morning, Jane woke up to the sound of her phone ringing. At first, she thought she was dreaming, but when she checked, she saw multiple calls coming in from different people. She answered in excitement, her heart racing with joy. "Hello, is this Jane the baker?" a man's voice asked. "Yes, this is Jane," she replied eagerly. "Please, I need a cake for my daughter's wedding. I heard you are the best." Jane smiled. "Of course, I will bake it for you." Before she could even drop the call, another call came in. "Jane, I need a cake shaped like a car. I heard your cakes are magical." Then another call followed. "Please, bake me a house-shaped cake. I need a new house." Call after call came in from people all over the village, both rich and poor. Jane could not believe what was happening. Just yesterday she was sitting under a tree, feeling hopeless. Now people, important people, were calling her to bake for them. With excitement in her heart, Jane got to work. She baked cakes for different people, and just like the old woman had said, every cake she baked came to life. She baked a beautiful wedding cake, and as soon as she finished, the cake transformed into a grand wedding stage with decorations, music, and even fresh flowers. The bride and groom were amazed, and the guests cheered in excitement. She baked a car-shaped cake for a man who had no car, and right before his eyes, the cake turned into a real, shiny car. The man screamed with joy and immediately got inside, driving it around the village to show everyone. Then one day, Jane was called by a very poor man who had nothing. No house, no money, not even proper clothes. He had heard of Jane's magical cakes and begged her to help him. "Jane, please," he said with tears in his eyes. "I have no home, no family, nothing. I have been suffering for many years. Can you bake me a house?" Jane looked at the man with pity. She could see how tired and hungry he was. Without hesitation, she went to work. She baked the most beautiful house-shaped cake she had ever made. The moment she finished, the cake glowed brightly and then, right in front of everyone's eyes, it transformed into a real house. A big, beautiful mansion with golden doors and shiny windows. The poor man fell to his knees crying. "Thank you, Jane, thank you. You have changed my life." Word quickly spread across the village. People could not believe what they were hearing. A baker who could create anything, houses, cars, even businesses, just by baking cakes, this was the greatest thing they had ever seen. Rich and poor people alike started coming to Jane, begging her to bake cakes for them. Some wanted new houses, others wanted farms, and some even requested shops and businesses. Jane was overwhelmed but happy. She was finally being recognized for her talent. However, she never forgot the old woman's warning, never bake a wild animal. She continued baking, growing richer and more famous with each passing day. Everyone in the village talked about her magical cakes. People traveled from faraway towns just to see her and order something from her. Jane's life had completely changed, but she did not know that soon a great challenge was coming her way. One that would test her patience, her kindness, and her obedience to the old woman's rule. Jane's fame spread far and wide. Her name was on everyone's lips, and her magical cakes were celebrated beyond her village. She was no longer the poor orphan who struggled to survive. Now, she lived in a grand mansion that she had bought with her own money. She had fleets of expensive cars and dressed in the finest clothes. Everywhere she went, people admired her, respected her, and treated her like royalty. Jane had become the wealthiest woman in the village. People who once ignored her now bowed before her, seeking favors. She was invited to the most prestigious events and paid huge sums of money just to bake her special cakes. Jane felt on top of the world, believing nothing could ever go wrong in her life. The tempting offer. One evening, Jane received a call from a group of rich men in the city. They wanted her to bake a cake for a grand celebration. "We don't want an ordinary cake, Jane," one of the men said. "We want something extraordinary, something that people will talk about forever." Jane smiled confidently. "Of course. I always make extraordinary cakes." But then, the man added something that made Jane freeze. "We want an animal cake," he said. "Something fierce, something powerful. If you can do this, we will pay you an amount so huge that you will never need to work again in your life." Jane's heart pounded. She remembered the old woman's warning, never bake a wild animal. When she got home, she sat in deep thought. The money they offered her was enough to make her the richest person in the entire country. But was it worth the risk? Maybe the old woman only told me that to stop me from discovering an even greater power, Jane thought. What if I bake a lion? A lion is the king of the jungle. That will surely amaze everyone and be remembered forever. Ignoring the warning, Jane made up her mind. I will bake a lion cake and see how it goes. The disaster at the event. On the day of the event, Jane arrived with the beautifully decorated lion cake. The guests gasped in admiration. "This is the most beautiful cake I have ever seen," someone exclaimed. The hall was filled with excitement. Everyone was eager to taste Jane's newest masterpiece. But just as the guests were about to cut the cake, something terrifying happened. The lion cake roared. The ground shook as the cake transformed into a real ferocious lion. The guests screamed in horror and ran in all directions. The lion roared again and charged at the crowd, knocking down chairs and tables. "We are finished!" people shouted as they ran for their lives. Jane's face turned pale with fear. Her hands trembled as she watched the chaos unfold. She knew she had made a terrible mistake. Suddenly, the old woman appeared in the middle of the hall. She raised her hands and, with a powerful wave, turned the lion back into a cake. The guests, who had been hiding behind tables and outside the venue, peeked inside, still shaking with fear. But no one wanted to stay any longer. They rushed out of the event, whispering that Jane had become dangerous. Her once glorious reputation was ruined in a single night. The price of disobedience. The old woman turned to Jane, her face filled with disappointment. "I warned you, Jane," she said. "I told you never to bake a wild animal, but you disobeyed me. You let greed and pride blind you." Jane fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face. "Please, forgive me. I made a mistake. I will never do it again." The old woman shook her head. "It is too late, Jane. Because of your disobedience, your gift is now gone. From this day forward, you will return to where you started. Your mansion, your cars, your money, everything will disappear." Before Jane could say another word, the old woman vanished. Jane rushed home, hoping it was all a bad dream. But when she arrived, her heart broke. Her grand mansion was gone. In its place stood the small broken house where she had lived as a poor orphan. Her expensive cars had vanished. The money in her bank account was no more. She was back to being the poor girl she once was. She sat on the ground, crying uncontrollably. "Why didn't I listen?" she thought. "Why did I allow greed to control me?" From that day, Jane lived in deep regret. She had once been the most successful woman in the village, but now she had lost everything because of one careless mistake. She spent the rest of her life remembering the moment she disobeyed the old woman's rule. She had learned a painful lesson, but it was too late to change her fate. Moral lessons. 1. Greed and pride can lead to downfall. Jane had everything she ever wanted, but because she wanted more, she lost it all. 2. Always listen to good advice. The old woman warned Jane for her own good, but she refused to obey. 3. Some risks are not worth taking. No amount of money is worth losing something valuable. 4. Be content with what you have. Jane was already rich and successful, but her desire for more destroyed her. Thank you for following Jane's journey with me. This story teaches us important life lessons about greed, obedience, and being careful with our choices. I hope you enjoyed it and learned something valuable. If you liked this story, please like, share, and subscribe for more engaging tales. See you in the next story.